Thank you very much. You can grab a seat. Our 1776 scholars are like the top of the top great students here at Colorado Christian University who serve at the Centennial Institute, and we were just so honored to have their help. And so you're looking at the next generation of leaders when you see our 1776 scholars up here. They're fantastic. So get to know them. Our speaker tonight is Lawrence Reed, and we're very, very excited to have him talking about his new book, Excuse Me, Professor, Challenging the Myths of Progressivism. And it's a great book where he tackles 52 of the kind of myths that progressivism puts out there. So everything from government must subsidize the arts, to free markets exploit women, to the minimum wage helps the poor. All these different kind of progressive myths he tackles in this book, which is it's a great kind of series of essays. I highly recommend you get it. He's going to be talking about that today. But let me give you a little bit of a background on Lawrence. Lawrence is the president of the Foundation for Economic Education. He became the president in 2008 after serving as the chairman of its board of trustees in the 1990s and both writing and speaking for the foundation since the late 1970s. Prior to becoming the foundation's president, he served for 20 years as the president of the Mackinac Center for Public Policy in Midland, Michigan. And the Mackinac Center is very similar to what the Centennial Institute or the Independence Institute would be to Colorado. Mackinac is to Michigan. A very prestigious, well-respected think tank there. He also taught economics from 1977 to 1984 at Northwood University in Michigan and chaired its Department of Economics from 1982 to 1984. He holds a BA in economics from Grove City College, an MA degree in history from Slippery Rock State University. Both are in Pennsylvania, and holds 2 doctorates, honorary doctorates, from the Central Michigan University and Northwood University. The Foundation for Economic Education was founded in 1946. What John Andrews said was this is the granddaddy of conservative think tanks. And so he heads that up now and is the leader in education, publishing, and production of ideas related to economic, ethical, and legal principles of a free society. So please join me in welcoming Larry Reed.
Thank you very much, Jeff, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen. If you're wondering, why does this guy keep coming back here? I love this place. I really do. I know I say that every time, but not only because the values of CCU align so closely to my own and those of Fee, but also because it's the only college campus in the country where I have my own parking sign. I know they trot it out every time. It's in metal, and it's got my name on it, and I know where the spot is where they put it every time, and there's no other campus in the country, not even the one I taught at in Michigan for all those years, where I have my own sign. So I'm thrilled to be with you and to be able to share a few thoughts with you about this book that has done very well in the last 6 months since it's been out. Excuse Me, Professor, Challenging the Myths of Progressivism. This book was put together over a year's period because we serialized each of the chapters over a year. That's why there are 52, one a week. It was put together with the idea that college students in particular need some antidote to the progressive ideology that has come to dominate so many campuses in the country. I see it everywhere I go. There are many, unlike CCU, which is an oasis in academia, there are so many places where progressive-minded professors is about all they have. And students graduate after 4 years, 6 years, however long it takes them to get through with a graduate, maybe an undergraduate degree as well, without ever knowing some of the most basic fundamentals about what made this country great. Or maybe what they do know about it is only the negative side, only the bumper stickers, the attacks. Private property is bad. I'm for people, not for profit. Capitalism, causes business cycles, and government can iron them out for us, and so forth. They know that stuff. They know Marx, they know Keynes, but they don't know Friedman, they don't know Hayek, they don't know Mises, they don't know the great thinkers on our side in so many cases. And they're constantly being harangued by progressive professors with that one side that basically says a small elite of very smart people, or at least people who think they're very smart, can plan an economy for a nation. And all they need are good intentions. And they can do wonderful things for everybody if we just arm them with political power and the ability to push people around. Well, I would guess that a lot of progressives would say I've not given them a fair hearing on a definition, but that's really what progressivism comes down to. It's rooted in this notion that a handful of very smart people armed with political power, never by just simply persuasion. It's always political power. You're not a progressive unless you're willing to use the power of government to accomplish your ends. But that a handful of people using political power can shape and mold a nation according to what they think is the public good. That philosophy has not only come to be so dominant on our campuses across the country, it is riddled with errors, historical, logical, and other errors, and many of which we try to address in the book. As I mentioned, it has 52 chapters, but it's not broken out in units. But if you looked at the book very carefully, the table of contents, you would see that the early chapters deal with progressive philosophy or philosophical matters, like fairness and should people be equal economically, that kind of thing. It's a big topic these days, isn't it? Especially with the presidential campaign underway. The middle part of the book deals with historical myths. And this is an area of special interest to me, where I'll spend more time tonight than on anything else. And then the final crop of chapters deals with some of the issues today, from the minimum wage to the introduction of robotics and its impact on employment and a lot of other things, all designed to educate young people, but it's really applicable to people of any age, about the merits of freedom and free markets and the errors of the progressive way of thinking. So what I'd like to do is just walk you through a few of the chapter topics tonight, just enough to give you a sampler. And the book is available on our website, fee.org, or Amazon, or the websites of Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, just about anywhere you can get it, except in the college classroom. But we're working on that. Well, the first myth I want to deal with concerns an important element in American history at the start of the last century. How many of you, let's say in your high school or college years, read Upton Sinclair's book, The Jungle? Anybody? Okay. And my guess is that not only all of you who raised your hand, but everyone else knows also how that book is typically sold to students today. That it is somehow the quintessential definitive study of the meatpacking industry, and lo and behold, Upton Sinclair dug up all kinds of nasty things, and how could anybody stand by while the meatpackers were making big money off of poisoning their customers? And the government had to step in with the passage of the Meat Inspection Act of 1906 to fix that. How many of you heard some version of that? Yeah, it's pretty typical, isn't it? Well, when I started researching this, one of the things I wanted to find out was who were the people that Sinclair alludes to who fell into the vats of meat products and were ground up and served to us at our dinner table. I thought, well, gee, those people, surely, they would be progressive icons, right? Wouldn't they? They'd be martyrs to the cause. There should be statues somewhere to them of, here's Bob, he fell into the vat and we ate him for supper. And what a martyr to the cause of the terrible things that capitalists did to him. Well, I couldn't find any names, not a one. Now, wouldn't you think that if those things had happened, as in his book he talks about such terrible things happening, wouldn't you expect that we'd know who those people were? You won't find a name because it didn't happen. Nobody ever said, what happened to Bob today? Or how come Jim didn't come home from work, Or, is that Jim on the dinner table? I mean, nobody ever said that because it never happened. And yet that's the way that that book is sold to this day, as if it was some kind of a documentary. It was a damning indictment of capitalism, meatpackers in particular, and it just cries out for government regulation. It turns out that Upton Sinclair was, first and foremost, a propagandist. He was paid $500, big money in those days, to write a screed that would have as its purpose the conversion of as many Americans as possible to the progressive doctrine of government domination of the economy, of socialism in particular. That was his mission. Even he was surprised at the reaction. The part about the terrible conditions in the meatpacking plants really is a matter of a few, I don't know, dozen or maybe a couple dozen pages. It's not the bulk of the book. He didn't think that that was the part that would get people excited, but it was, because people read it, they thought, holy cow, does that really happen? But it never did. Another myth associated with the book is that there was no government inspection prior to the passage of the 1906 Meat Inspection Act. And therefore, if those conditions really existed, you've got a case for government meat inspection. That was the idea anyway. But even that is false. This is public record too, and yet so many professors never tell their students this. You can go back, as I did, and read publicly from almost any library in the country the debates in the Congress over the 1906 Meat Inspection Act. And you'll find congressmen saying, we're debating whether or not to set up a new regime of meat inspection. But we've had one for years, state and federal meat inspectors. We should be asking, were they asleep at the switch? And if so, if there's a failure in existing meat inspection, what are we doing just piling on some new regime on top of what surely must be failure? But you never hear that story, do you? Anybody ever hear that? But it's public record. I invite anybody to go back in the congressional record and you'll find the same debates that I did. So there was meat inspection. And a related myth to this is that the meat packers ultimately fought this new effort at federal regulation tooth and nail. Because they were wicked, greedy capitalists, they just wanted to be left alone so they could poison their customers. And they fought this to the bitter end. In fact, they supported the Meat Inspection Act. You know why? Anybody want to hazard a guess? Why did they support it? Competition. They thought that they could crush the smaller competition because, after all, the big guys with the big, deep pockets, they'd be able to buy off the regulators if they ever became too intrusive. That's one of the reasons. But there's something else about the act itself that they knew, they probably helped put it in, that caused them to enthusiastically support the act. And Upton Sinclair was oblivious to it. Who do you think picked up the tab for the cost of meat inspection and putting the government's official stamp of approval on meat products under the Meat Inspection Act? It was government. Yet before that time, the meat packers paid for inspection because they were eager to show people that, hey, see, we do have labeling agencies and so forth that stamp our product as safe. Well, they paid for that. But the Meat Inspection Act took that millions of dollars tab off their shoulders and put it on the shoulders of the taxpayer. So again, you have these funny progressive people like Upton Sinclair who running around with this moral righteousness about we're going to save people and stick it to those capitalists. Meanwhile, those guys are laughing all the way to the bank thinking we can take care of the regulators if we have to, and we like the fact that somebody else is going to pay the cost of the whole system. That is largely forgotten in, or if it was ever even told, in the typical conventional history text. So that's responded to in here, and I just love the thought, I hope it's happening around the country, of a student raising his hand in a class after a professor has propagated the old Upton Sinclair myth and saying something like, excuse me, professor, that's not exactly the way it happened. I don't know how many students will feel so emboldened, but at least they have the facts and figures to share amongst themselves, even if the professor won't let them do it in front of the class. From that, roughly that same era is another myth that has become central to the progressive historian's doctrine. And that concerns a great builder of enterprise in American history by the name of John D. Rockefeller. And I know what what the rap is on Rockefeller. Well, he did all kinds of terrible things to get a high market share in his industry, and he's the number one boogeyman. He's the guy that proves that we need things like strong antitrust laws to keep these big guys from taking over markets, cornering them, abusing customers and competitors. Well, it turns out that the actual fact is very different from that myth. Progressives need myths, it seems, to propagate, to justify their agenda of bigger government. And so often, have you ever noticed this? They want more government, irrespective, it seems, of its track record or the outcome. It's like, take healthcare. It's been more important to people like Hillary and Obama and other progressives that government be in charge of your healthcare. That's more important than whether or not the quality of healthcare improves or its price gets any more affordable. And they steal good words too. They call things like Obamacare the Affordable Care Act, and promise a $2,500 reduction in the cost of health care per family, and you get just the opposite. This is nothing new. They like boogeymen, they like myths, because I guess they feel maybe deep down that without them, they'd have a much tougher sell. So Rockefeller is often held up as, well, we can't have an economy with people like that who do terrible things to people. There are a number of charges against Rockefeller that I answer in the book, but let me back up just a bit and give you a little bit of background on him. Do you know that he should be regarded as the man who saved more whales than anybody else in human history? Because the primary source of lighting, of fuel for lighting, before kerosene came along with the discovery of oil in Pennsylvania in 1859, was whale oil. We'd been using that for many decades. But in the 19th century, the early part of that century, as industrial economies were growing, populations were growing, the demand for whale oil was increasing, but with whales being sort of commons or common property, nobody had either the incentive or perhaps the technical ability to husband and farm them. We all had reason to use them, and so nobody knew how to increase the supply. So what was happening is the supply of whales diminished, and yet the demand for whale oil increased. You had in the first half dozen decades of the 19th century rising prices of whale oil. Well, at that time, we didn't have a federal Department of Energy. How we managed to get through this, I don't know, but no federal agency charged with the duty of managing a problem into perpetuity at great expense. And so we let the price system do it. And the rising price of whale oil accomplished a couple things. On the demand side, as the price went up, it did cause some hardship. Some people were better able to adapt than others, no question. Others were able to say, maybe if it's going to cost that much, maybe I'll just do my reading during the daylight hours. Or, I think I've got a couple candles up in the attic. I ought to just pull them out and use that instead. Or whatever. They kind of made do without maybe buying as much whale oil as they might otherwise. But the more important effect came on the supply side. As the price of whale oil rose, entrepreneurs in a relatively free economy began looking for opportunities. They said, there's money to be made in lighting people's homes. If we can find an alternative to increasingly scarce whale oil, we could make some money. And there was this oily stuff called oil that was coming on the creeks of western Pennsylvania, where I'm originally from. And Indians were using it for various things. And it wasn't known until the 1850s whether or not this stuff could be found in large quantities from wherever it was coming, and if it could be commercially viable in the marketplace as a fuel for lighting. Often, if you just try to burn it as you found it on the creeks of western Pennsylvania, it would be very dirty. But there were some entrepreneurs who said, we think this stuff might be in great quantity beneath the earth. We just need to find it, and maybe we can even improve it so it'll burn cleaner, and this will be a great way to make money at a time when the market is crying for an alternative. There was a group of Connecticut businessmen venture capitalists, who sent a man to Titusville, or to Pennsylvania, ended up in Titusville. His name was Colonel Edwin Drake. And they said, here's some money. You go see if you can find that stuff, where it's coming from, and whether or not you can bring it forth, and in what kind of quantity. He almost used the entire sum of money. It was almost gone, and they pulled the plug and said, we're not going to give you any more. Come back when you're done. Then he went out and borrowed another $500, and that was about gone when, in 1859, he struck oil in Titusville, Pennsylvania, the first oil well. It was, by any measure, a gusher. And it really soared, I think, 100 feet or more in the air as it was tapped. Well, he was able to cap it, and all of a sudden, bingo, there is a rush, an oil rush in western Pennsylvania to get this stuff. Now that we know you can bring it forth in great quantity, let's go get it. John D. Rockefeller, in 1865, in this market that must have seemed chaotic with so many people punching holes, you could see pictures, I still remember that, I have some books of them, pictures of what hillsides in western Pennsylvania look like. And if you look at them from this distance, it looks like it's a heavily wooded hillside. And you look closer and you realize those aren't trees, those are derricks. Everybody's punching oil in the ground to try to, everybody and his brother, it seemed, jumped into the oil business. They were taking crude and refining it into kerosene as the replacement for whale oil. John D. Rockefeller in 1865, in this incredibly chaotic market, had been only a bookkeeper, a grocer. He was a regular Sunday school teacher and tither to his church. He was not born with a silver spoon in his mouth. That's the later Rockefellers, but this guy was the real thing. And he sees an opportunity, and he forms a partnership with others in the oil business. That's 1865. 5 years later, he forms the Standard Oil Company, for which he became quite famous. And in that first year of operation, 1870, he captured 4% of the kerosene market, 4%, which really sounds paltry, but it was quite an achievement for a newcomer with little background. But Rockefeller had an incredibly uncanny ability to manage people, to find the right people. And once he found them, he didn't micromanage them. He said, okay, you're the talent I'm looking for. You get the job done, I'll reward you well. And he let them go off and do their thing. A very, very good manager. He was also a penny pincher when it came to costs. He was almost notorious for finding ways to coax more kerosene out of a barrel of crude and get it on the market at the lowest possible cost. One of the stories is about the time he went to one of his own plants where they were making barrels for crude oil made of wood with metal staves around the side. And he noticed the solder that the men were welding the staves with. And he said, I think you're using 2 drops too much solder. You wouldn't think that'd make a difference, but he gave the order. He said, okay, we're going to use 2 drops of solder less per stave on barrels. They'll still hold. We don't need it. And that saved him hundreds of thousands of dollars over the tens of millions of barrels that he made. And it's just one example of many such things that he did. Well, in 1890, just 20 years after he had 4% of the market, John D. Rockefeller's Standard Oil Company had 90% of the oil refining, of the refined product kerosene at that time market, 90%. And that's the source of much of the progressive attack on Rockefeller. Oh, how could anybody have 90% of any market? That gives him terrible power. He must have done awful things to get there. They forget a lot of convenient facts. One, that 90% share was very fleeting, even before the Supreme Court came in and broke up the trust for no good reason. I can return to that a little later. In 1911, the market had already whittled away that market share from 90% down to about 65%. And there were things happening in the 1890s that meant that even somebody as smart as Rockefeller couldn't dominate a market that thoroughly for very long. One was he focused on western Pennsylvania and Ohio. That's where oil was discovered. That's where he focused. He did not see the coming oil boom in Texas, and that might be because he read the 1890 U.S. Geological Survey, which said, quote, "No oil will be found in Texas." Entrepreneurship is like a never-ending leapfrog. The guy who's the leader today can easily become the follower tomorrow. You've got all kinds of competitors nipping at your heels. Also, what was happening in the market for lighting. If you think about it, he was not just in the kerosene market, he was in the market for lighting. Just like I'm not just in the market for Lawrence Reed speeches. I've got 100% monopoly on that. I'm in the market for speeches, and there I look pretty small. There are lots of others who give speeches. He was in the lighting business. What comes along by the 1890s to increasingly cause people to say, I don't need kerosene anymore? It's electricity and Thomas Edison. So the idea that he could dominate this, plus gasoline comes along as a fuel for the newly invented automobile, and he was a little bit slow to see that. Other refiners were able to cater to that demand a little quicker than he was. But the charges leveled against Rockefeller reduced to really 3 or 4 big ones. One of them is that he used predatory price cutting. Oh, he couldn't have gotten 90% share without driving the price down and driving everybody else out of business and then jacking the price back up. That's predatory price cutting. You look at the typical history text, and that's reported as if it's just fact. Everybody knows it. We don't have to prove it. We just say it, and everybody believes it. There was an economist at the University of Chicago who wrote, and this is very easily accessible online, in October 1958, in the Journal of Law and Economics. His name was Professor John McGee. He decided to be the first guy to really look into this in any detail to find out, did Rockefeller do this? And his conclusion was, for good reason, that I'll shed some light for you on, Rockefeller not only never tried it, he would have been stupid to have attempted it for several reasons. Now think about it. You'd think it'd be easy to do, right? If you've already got 90% of the share, of the market, I should say, and you've got 66 other competitors, but they're all so tiny that combined they're only 10% of the market, you'd think, well, you can crush those guys pretty easily. The problem with that idea is it's a lot more easily said than done. How many of you know anything about Herbert Henry Dow? You ever heard of him, the founder of the Dow Chemical Company? If I could digress just for a moment, Dow gives us a wonderful real-life example of a guy who was intended to be the prey of predatory price cutting, but turned out to be the predator in this sense. Herbert Henry Dow, I know this story because I lived in the town where he started his company for 33 years, Midland, Michigan. He was a chemist, and he devised a way using electrolysis to extract bromine from the briny waters that we had in mid-Michigan. Bromine was a chemical used in everything from the production of aspirin to the production of other chemicals. And that market was dominated by a German cartel of big German companies that enjoyed lots of favors and goodies from the German government. He decides, hey, I can sell bromine cheaper than their price of 46 cents a pound. He starts manufacturing it and selling it profitably for 36 cents a pound. Very famously in our little town of Midland, the Germans sent a delegation to Midland to tell him face to face, don't you dare sell bromine outside of the United States for anything less than our price of 46 cents a pound. He literally tossed them out of his office, ordered them to leave, and Dow was the kind of scrappy entrepreneur who wouldn't have anybody walk in and tell him he couldn't sell what he wanted wherever he could sell it. So the Germans then decide, okay, we warned him. They start dumping bromine. Everywhere it looks like he may have a market, they dump it for 15 cents a pound, thinking, well, he won't be able to make any money at that. We'll just drive him out. We're big enough. We can withstand this price war till he's gone. Guess what he did? He had agents. The Germans didn't know they were his agents. He told them, he said, go buy all the 15-cent bromine that those idiots will sell. And we'll just repackage it and put my name on it. And so he did, and the Germans kept thinking, where's all this demand coming from for this program? Well, we better meet it, because if we don't, then those are customers for Dow. But it was Dow himself. This was an important early source of capital for the Dow Chemical Company, which is now such a giant. A lot easier said than done. Well, if the big guy, say Rockefeller, had tried this in 1890, first of all, I should point out, John McGee looked at actual prices and to see, okay, you would expect to see a downward plunge in prices and then a big increase. If Rockefeller did this, we should be able to see that in prices. We know what prices of kerosene were. We know what people were paying for. And if you weren't paying a fair price, you probably screamed about it. So you couldn't very well keep it quiet. He said in his definitive study, he said the prices of kerosene all the years that Rockefeller was growing, from 1870 to 1890, steadily fell from 45 cents a pound to a low of 3 cents a pound. They never spiked. He was the guy who was finding how to make it better and cheaper and cut the price to consumers. And they loved what he was doing. Consumers were laughing all the way to the bank, I suppose. He helped to drive the price down, and the kerosene of 1890 was far better in quality than the kerosene of 1870. So he improved the product and drove the price down for everybody. In a market in which you had competitors from all over the world, not just within the United States. If he had decided that he could somehow drive everybody else out, all those other 66 competitors in 1890, at the peak of his market share, would he have known how long he would have to do that before he would drive them out? How long he'd have to keep the price artificially low? I don't know what that would be, 2 cents before everybody else went out? You never know how long it's going to take. Some of them can just say, well, I'll just sit it out until the war's over and then I'll jump back in. Or they may sell to somebody else who picks it up at a song and now with lower capital costs can compete with him head to head. It's a very uncertain process. But this is for sure. If you do that, and if you drive everybody else out, as the theorists would have us believe, then the more you try later to cash in on that by raising the price, the more that's like hanging out a sign competitors wanted, because that's what you'll get. If 66 other competitors found it worth their while to do business when he had 90% of the market, if he had slashed the price, driven them out, and then later raised it to that level or even higher, how many others would have come in? Maybe even a big company. It wouldn't have to be some upstart working out of his garage. It could be a giant in another industry that sees an opportunity made available by excessive prices from Standard Oil. So the theory sounds good, doesn't work very well in practice. It's a lot harder to drive people out as long as markets are relatively free. And the higher you tend to raise the price later, if you ever get to that point, the more you tend to attract competition that you thought you had eliminated. I want to get to some other myths, so I had to run through maybe just one of the other charges against Rockefeller that's often raised. The idea that, he must have colluded and conspired with his competitors. He must have sat down with them and they worked out secret agreements to carve up the market and raise the price. The same guy gets hit from all angles. Did he drive him out? Did he sit down and conspire with him, or did he just buy him out, or which is it? Some of these charges seem to be a bit contradictory. But OPEC should tell us that even government attempts at cartels tend to break apart, and they've got the bottomless pit of the taxpayer to draw on if they get in trouble. Rockefeller never had that. There's a book written by a late author now, he just died a year or so ago, Gabriel Kolko, called The Triumph of Conservatism. I highly recommend it if you like American economic history. And the interesting thing is, Kolko, all his life, was an avowed socialist. But this is a terrific book. In fact, he couldn't understand when it came out and all of us free market types were saying, wow, what a great book. And he wrote a letter to Reason Magazine saying, why are you free market people praising my book? I'm not for the free market. I'm a socialist. Well, the point of his book is he was a very good historian. He went back and he found in industry after industry, including oil, there were sometimes attempts by competing interests to kind of arrive at a secret agreement to restrict production, raise the price, because the price was just too low in the market. They want to make more money. But cocoa found none of these agreements lasted much longer than it took for the ink to dry. Why? Let's say I'm Rockefeller, and it's 1890, and I've got my 90% share. You're my 66 other competitors. All told, your share is only 10%. So I convene this secret meeting at my hideaway, and I say, you know, isn't the market chaotic? Wouldn't you like to get a higher price? I sure would. What's the first problem we have to solve if we're going to try to get the price of our product up and make it stick? If nobody is to be stuck with unsold inventories. Get everybody to agree to what? Cut production is the first problem, right? Because if we just put out as much as before, the price ain't going to go up. So we got to find, how are we going to cut production? Well, if the price is going to be higher, you're all going to want to increase your production, right? If we all have an incentive in getting the other guy to cut his production. But I say, look, in fairness, let's just everybody cut our production by 10%. And with that much less oil on the market, the price will go up and we'll all get more for whatever we sell. Are you all going to agree to that? Some of you are going to say, wait a minute, Mr. Rockefeller, you're a big guy. 10% for you is like 80% for me. So that ain't fair. But let's assume we solve that problem somehow, okay? We arrive at some secret formula to restrict our production, and we arrive at a designated higher price. We all shake hands now, we got a deal, keep it quiet. What am I gonna do as soon as I leave the room? What are you gonna do? Yeah, I'm gonna get on the phone to your customers, and I'm gonna say, hey, you know, the price is going up, but if you buy from me and keep it quiet, I'll give you a discount. Well, why did we enter into the agreement in the first place? To make more money, okay? Now that we have the agreement, how do you make more money? You break it. That's how you hope the other guy sticks to it. And that's why Coco said, yeah, they went into these agreements lots of times with some guys thinking, I'll get Joe over here, he'll cut his production and he'll raise his price, but I can undercut it once he does that. That happened all the time. But progressive historians only tell you half the story. They just say, oh, there were attempts and that we can't have that. They never tell you that the attempts didn't succeed. That all you need is a market as free as possible for these things to break apart about as much time as it takes for the ink to dry. And finally, the last charge that I think is the most ridiculous against Rockefeller is that, well, this is kind of like a fallback after sometimes if you rebut all the others, then they'll come back to this. Well, but he was just a greedy businessman. He did all that oil production not because he loved us, but because he just wanted to make money. There's something evil about that. You get some version of that, of some intensity, all over America in college campuses. In fact, if you ever visit Rockefeller's grave, which is outside of Cleveland, Ohio, you'll notice a marker. It really struck me when I first saw it. I thought, here's a guy who, in my mind, should be remembered as a great man because of the vast enterprise that he built in an extraordinarily competitive marketplace that was global in scope. He created wealth. He provided employment for literally hundreds of thousands of people. He drove the cost of an important product down to historic lows, and he saved the whales. That's what I would have written. But you go there to the gravesite, and you see about half of the verbiage on a little plaque there is about the money he gave away. He was the first man to give away $1 billion to charity. And while I think that's just fine, laudable, I think that before he can give it away, you got to know how to make it. And that was his genius. Anybody can give it away. They're doing it in Washington every day. But not everybody knows how to make it in the first place. That's why he should be celebrated. He was a genius at enterprise. The giving away of stuff is sort of after the fact and no big deal. I could do that. Well, but I need to move on. I want to give you at least another myth from the book. I'm sorry. There's still allow time for questions. If I do that in, say, 5 minutes and then open it to questions, that'd be all right? Okay. Let's see. How about, I'll let you pick. I could do minimum wage or balance of trade or Kim? Oh, Jesus was a socialist. Oh, this is one of my favorites. Yeah, let's do that. I'm glad. Thank you for thinking of that. That's a chapter in here. And in fact, that essay that is a chapter in here And the heading reads like the myth does, that Jesus would be a redistributionist because he wanted to help the poor. That's been expanded. After I wrote the chapter, I roughly doubled it into an essay, a standalone, and it's available for $1 or $2 on our website, but you can read it free there too. If you just go to fee.org and type in, "Was Jesus a socialist?" you'll go right to it. I hear this all the time. How many of you have heard it, one version or another? Amazing number of kids come up thinking that, oh yeah, he wanted to share things, and he wanted to help poor people. I remember a few years ago answering this myth before I ever wrote it up in Nassau, Bahamas, on a television show with two guys, very progressive in their leanings, and me in the middle. They were on either side, peppering me with questions. And at one point, I kind of had a revelation, but it was because of the way they set it up. One of them said, "Oh, Mr. Reed, you're a Christian and you're also a capitalist." Like it's, like that's not compatible. Yeah. And he said, the one guy says, "What about the Good Samaritan story? Doesn't that suggest we need government programs? A guy needs help. You need programs to help people." And just the way he set it up, I thought, well, wait a minute. The Good Samaritan was a Good Samaritan because of his personal response to the situation. He didn't say to the guy in the ditch, "Call your social worker," or, "Oh, that's a duty for your congressman." No, what did he do? He pitched in. He helped the guy personally. That's why he's a Good Samaritan. If he'd done the other, we'd know him to this day as the good-for-nothing Samaritan. So, but you can see the progressive mindset. They just thought, oh, person in need must be a government problem. As if we're all, we know how to elect the compassionate people, but we don't know how to be compassionate ourselves, which is so ridiculous. There is a passage in the book of Luke, where Luke 12:13 through 15, where Christ is approached by a man who's with a request for a little redistribution. He says, "Master, speak to my brother that he divideth the inheritance with me." In other words, with a wave of the hand, you could divvy things up a little better. And you know what Christ's response was? He didn't say, "Well, I'll look into it. I'll see, what he's got, what you got, and we'll try to make it more equal." He immediately said, "Man, who made me a judge or divider over you?" Wouldn't you love to see the day when Harry Reid or Nancy Pelosi would say that to anybody demanding something from the government? Stand up and say, "Oh, sorry, who made me a judge or divider over you?" No, they would never say that because they're doing it all the time. But when Christ was presented with this opportunity, he rebuked the man for his envy and his covetousness, told him to shift his focus elsewhere. Christ never once, anywhere, is recorded to have advocated anything that looks even remotely like the use of political power to take from some and give to others. None. Zero. There is no such passage anywhere. In the parable of the talents that he told, we have a famous, reasonably well-known, I should say, example of 3 men who are told to go out and put some money to use, and which one ends up being lauded in the story? It's the one who turns it into the greatest return, the one who's criticized, from whom, as I recall, isn't there something taken from him and given to the guy who already made the most? Yeah, the message is, don't sit on your wealth. Don't think you're doing some good for people by just sitting on it, not creating more. Here's a guy who went out with what he had and he created wealth. He made the world better off as a result. He's the one we will reward. That's the message of the parable of the talents. Christ came because, as he said more than once, to fulfill the law. And an important centerpiece of the law, of course, is the 10 Commandments, 2 of which deal directly with private property. One of them, the 8th, says, "Thou shalt not steal." Note there's a period after the word steal. It does not say, "Thou shalt not steal unless the other guy has more than you do." Or, "Thou shalt not steal unless you're just absolutely convinced you could use it better or spend it better than the guy who earned it." Or, "Thou shalt not steal unless you can hire a politician who'll do it for you." "Thou shalt not covet." the 10th commandment. So I don't think Jesus was a socialist at all. He was, first of all, concerned with far more important things than the material wealth or material substance of our earthly lives. But when pressed, it was quite apparent, I think, from all that he said. He would not call for the cops to come in and, under the force of government, take from some and give to others. So I don't see how he could be a socialist. Remember, though, how progressives like to steal not only your property, they steal your vocabulary, too. The word liberal used to be ours. You know, to be liberal meant to be in favor of liberty. Well, they realized, gee, that's too good of a word to let the other side have, so let's grab it. And we let them do that. But time and again, they steal more than just your wealth. They steal your vocabulary. My point in saying that is that, well, good question. What is my point in saying that? There's so many things I wanted to pack into that, I kind of got distracted for a second there. Well, you see the point, right? That why should I belabor it when you already see it? He never advocated the political use of power to take from some and give to others. Just never happened. Well, that's just a small taste of the book. I think I gave you a little taste of like 3 or 4 chapters, but there are 52. I hope you'll give it a look, pass it on to students in particular, and put it to good use. And I'm happy now to take some questions. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
How about you give us 5 minutes on the minimum wage?
Yes.
5 minutes on the minimum wage? I bet I can do that and even less. Okay. It's a progressive myth that government can decree happiness. And it can just mandate things, just pass a law, and call the cops. And all kinds of wonderful things will happen. We can raise wages if we just pass a law that says it's illegal to pay people less than a certain amount. I wish it were so, but that's just not the way the real world works. You cannot, as the late economist long associated with fee, I'm proud to say, Henry Hazlitt said, you cannot make a person worth a certain amount by making it illegal to pay him any less. Let's say they pass a law, as some are calling today, that says nobody can be paid less than $15 an hour. That's the new mantra of the progressive left. $15 an hour. Anything less is unfair. Let me ask you then, is there no such thing as a job that by its very nature, or conditions in the market, is worth only $10 an hour? Is every job, no matter what it is, anywhere, any place, just automatically worth whatever congressmen decide must be paid? That's ridiculous. It's just utterly, it's preposterous. I don't know how we don't do anything but laugh at it. Of course there are $10 an hour jobs. And of course there are $10 an hour people who either because they're very young, unskilled, they don't have references yet, they haven't proven themselves, they got a bad record maybe, or maybe the job is it's sweeping the floor. It's not worth $15 an hour maybe. What happens to those people and those jobs when the law says anything less than 15 is illegal? That's like saying to every worker, if you can't find a job that pays at least $15 an hour, you're not allowed to work. That's the way we ought to look at it, but it's rarely put that way. So if $15 an hour makes sense, if simply decreeing higher wages makes sense, I don't know why do they settle for 15? I mean, that seems pretty stingy to me. Why not make it 25, $50 an hour? It's really Alice in Wonderland economics, but that is central to the progressive ideology. It's, we can accomplish wonderful things by sleight of hand. That's medieval thinking, really. It goes back to medieval times when the king could just command the waves not to come in or just tell people by decree that one thing or another is going to happen. It's, you really got to get people out of the clouds when you're talking to progressives and get them at least 1 foot back on the ground to realize that this stuff sounds nice, but it's not reality. Julian. By the way, Julian Adorni, I thought you were from Seattle, as I was surprised to see it. But he has a chapter in the book, too. Yes.
I was wondering about I was wondering about the Department of Labor, or the Meat Inspection Act. If the costs were passed on to the taxpayer, would that reduce the cost, the barriers to entry and encourage competition? Like, why would the meats packers be excited about that?
If the costs were, oh, well, because they felt they had considerable market share. They already had huge investments in name brands and so forth. And the little guy, yeah, he's going to be freed of the cost of inspection. Now the taxpayer will pick it up for him too. But we can deal with him in other ways. Yeah, we can take care of him.
Thanks.
Yeah. And that's the attitude of a lot of big companies. They're not necessarily for competition or for the little guy. And if they can get a special favor from the government, they'll get it. And crony capitalism, yeah. Which, by the way, I always thought was a bit of a misnomer. Because if it's capitalism, true capitalism, it's not cronyism. It ought to be crony socialism. Because that's what socialism always reduces to. It's cronyism. It's political powers rewarding their friends, using the power of government to get things done they could never have accomplished in the free marketplace. So I don't like that term, but it's what it is. Yes, sir. Brandon.
Thank you very much. A very popular myth, in addition to all of these on the left, is that of environmentalism. Capitalists are going to ruin the environment, and we have to use the government to come in and save the environment. Beyond saving the whales, save the air and save the water. I'd be very curious to hear if you deal with that issue in your book,
Yes.
and if so, or if not, how the free market can deal with environmental issues.
Yes, good question. And we do deal with it, I think, in 2 chapters from 2 different angles. And the thrust of the counterargument is that a clear definition of property rights will do more to preserve and protect the environment among a people concerned about environmental stewardship than anything else. And it usually works better than top-down, one-size-fits-all mandates from Washington. And by clearer definition of property rights, I mean being able to, if somebody dumps something in the air that then wafts over your property and goes into your lungs, you ought to be able to take them to court and prove that they did damage to you. And seek redress of grievances. If government has any legitimate function at all, surely it is to provide for those who have been injured by others to get settlement, get justice. That's why we have a court system. And if you look at things that are chronically polluted, now there are plenty of exceptions, but overwhelmingly those things tend to be what everybody owns in common or what nobody owns.
So I'm going to ask you a very contemporary issue about immigration.
Mm-hmm.
You probably heard the statement that immigrants take jobs from Americans.
Yeah.
Do you think it's a myth or fact? Why?
This is a great question, and it's so much misunderstanding. You know, in a thriving free economy, you wouldn't have to worry about a static number of jobs. We have, as human beings, we have unlimited wants. We'll never get to the point where, as long as markets are free and people have incentive to create enterprise and hire people, you'll never get to the situation where you can say, all wants have been met, nobody else needs anything, the jobs have all disappeared now, nothing, you know, I mean, human wants are unlimited and always will be. I think that's part of the human condition. Now, when an immigrant comes here and takes a job, I mean take not in a sense of seizing it, but taking a job, does that mean that there's a job there that used to belong to an American who was now fired? Almost never is that the case. Usually it releases American labor to do other things that tend to be more highly paid. If you want everybody's wages to go up, you don't restrict things like the supply of labor or of goods. You allow those supplies to respond to prices. So I've never felt that immigrants take jobs, they create wealth, they add more, as long as, you know, the welfare state complicates things, but that's a problem of government, not of the free market. I've always felt that humans are the greatest resource that we have. Without humans, their ingenuity, their labor, all the material resources in the world just sit there idle, doing nothing for anybody. It's people who take those things and make something of them for the good of everybody. And it's markets that channel that productivity in constructive directions. But now we've gotten into a situation where our welfare state is probably a magnet for people to come. They used to come not for welfare. They came because this was the land of opportunity. They added to wealth in society. And we didn't see unemployment go up because people came here to work. So I've been always skeptical of that. If I had my druthers, I would, of course, eliminate the welfare state, even if it means having to phase parts of it out over time, not doing it all at once, so that the one and only reason people would come here, or the overwhelming reason, would be to create wealth by providing themselves for employment in mutually beneficial contractual relationships with employers and starting businesses themselves. You never hear, when people who make this argument about immigrants taking jobs, they never talk about, well, what about the immigrants here who came here and actually started a business and created jobs? They're all over the place. You know, you look at the landscape guy who's working in your yard, but you may not know that he or his friend actually started the company that provided the employment. But we don't add that up. We just see a guy who, he's trimming my bushes, and that could have been an American doing that. I don't think we get the whole story. So I don't think people are the problem. It's the welfare state system that is the source of so many of the problems that immigration gets blamed for. One more? Yes?
Thanks, Larry. Molly Vogt,
Molly?
Denver. So one of our presidential candidates, Bernie Sanders, is getting a lot of action with the kids right now.
Yeah.
They're following him. Their stickers are all over Colorado.
Yeah.
And, you know, I understand that he's offering free college.
Yeah.
And for many students, this is the first time in their life they've had a debt so big. So
Yeah.
I can understand how they'd say, yeah, if you're gonna get rid of my college debt, I'll vote for you.
Yeah.
What do you say to a 19-year-old person who's
Yeah.
thinking of voting for Bernie for that reason?
Yeah. Makes me think we need another book, Excuse Me, Bernie. That'll be the next one. Well, I think you have to show some empathy. I wouldn't start right off. There's a gut instinct in me that wants me to say, you know, where are you going to get the money for that? Who are you going to steal it from? What you want politicians to go take it from somebody else? You're going to be the primary beneficiary, if there is any benefit to whatever you're getting at whatever college you're attending. But you want other people to be forced to pay for that? Where's your moral conscience? I'm inclined to want to say that, but I'd find a more gentle way to say it. And I'd also remind them that rather than look to some new government program as the solution, wouldn't it make sense to ask ourselves, is government maybe part of the problem here in the first place? Because if it is, maybe we don't want it to get even bigger. And there you don't have to look very far when you find out, yes, it has been part of the problem. Throwing big bucks at college education has actually caused tuition to go through the roof. And it's insulated a lot of college administrations and faculty from the winds of the marketplace. Oh, we can raise the price because they'll just get more money from the government. There's a lot of that going on. Well, that's a problem of existing government programs. And also, the existing government programs have made a lot of students less cautious, less wise in their decisions. And they just have to face up to that. You have to point out, look, if you feel it's the responsibility of other people you don't even know to pay so you can go to earn a degree for which there are no jobs, then you've got a character issue here that has to be dealt with, because no society of upstanding people of solid character runs around sending the bill for their exploits to people they don't even know. I mean, does that bother? Bernie Sanders never raises such moral questions. He thinks it's only a moral question if we're not giving people something. He never asks the question, might it be a moral issue when we take it from people, or make them dependent upon us in government, making all kinds of unaffordable promises to them. It really is an issue that should transcend generations. We should get young people to say today, look, don't think of just yourself. That's why we have a $19 trillion national debt, because we've had a lot of people, politicians and a lot of them who voted for them, who have thought only of themselves and didn't care about sending you the bills for their programs. You want to do that? You want the government to spend billions more. It's already $19 trillion in the red, and you want to send that tab effectively to your kids and your grandkids. What is wrong with you? That is a moral question. Pull yourself together. Well, I don't know how effective that would be with a lot of them, but but I think it is a sad commentary, isn't it? That how do you go through 12 years of schooling and think that college education is free? Or the government, if it takes care of it, it's free. A government has nothing to give anybody except what it first takes from somebody. And a government that's big enough to give you everything you want is big enough to take away everything you've got. Thank you so much, everybody. Appreciate it. Thank you.
I think you can see why the Centennial Institute and President Armstrong are such a big fan of Larry Reed. When we announced that Larry was coming, a lot of the professors and folks that we work with here were so excited. You did a great job. Another round of applause for Larry. That was really good. Thank you. March 14th, Linda Chavez discussing immigration reform will be back here, so please sign up for that, March 14th. Linda Chavez, she's wonderful. You'll really enjoy that. Thank you all for coming out. I pray that God will bless you in the week ahead. Thank you for being such a good friend of the Centennial Institute. Have a good night.